Hey everyone, how you doing? Um, Here's the last paper. My concept research paper is called The Historical Motivations Behind the People's Republic of China and Red Hacker Alliance to Conduct Cyber Network Operations. This is essentially a continuation of my previous paper for the government section, but I basically threw out all the international relations um, theory stuff. Let me read you my thesis. Here it is. While the motivations behind the Chinese government and hacker community may diverge in conducting cyber network operations, their ability to unofficially collaborate is partly due to a shared understanding of seeking vindication for the nation's past humiliation via the organization and exercising of informational power. So a large part of my paper really focuses on the center of humiliation, and I use that as a point of departure. I also focus on mainly the time period from the early 1990s to 2004. And I picked 2004 as an end date just because that's when the Red Hacker Alliance dissolved at the end of that year, but then they emerged later. So I just thought it was a good cutoff point in that sense. My paper is divided into four parts. So part one, focuses on the center of humiliation, of course. And this is basically just to set up the rest of my analysis that occurs later in the paper. I essentially begin with Sarah Brahman's discussion on nations and our interpretation of culture, as well as Carl Deutsch's discussion on culture. I use both of them as a point of departure to discuss the construction of Chinese identity and how the center of humiliation feeds into that identity. Now, I'm not going to get into all the nuts and bolts of my discussion, but I'll basically tell you this, that I essentially conclude by using Purnima Mankakar's discussion on memory and how it is based on the ongoing discussion of the center of humiliation that culture continues to be a crucial battleground and an object of struggle over identity and political control. Now, the second part of my paper focuses on the origins of the PRC's cyber network operations. Now, I talk about a lot of different stuff and use a couple of theories, but let me just tell you what I thought was the most interesting aspect of this section. Essentially, the origins of their cyber network operations goes back to the 1991 Gulf War, which actually just makes a lot of sense because, when you watch, CNN videos of the 1991 Gulf War, you see all these Tomahawk cruise missiles being launched, which is essentially operated by satellite technology. And this is what really impressed the Chinese government and encouraged them to take a very serious look at cyber network operations. So let me just read you just a part from that section, which basically kind of summarizes what part two is about. The 1991 Gulf War further reinforced this approach and for China to emerge, in Brahman's language, as a nation of informational power by re-evaluating the infrastructure that would bolster this strategy. This consisted of reassessing their instrumental power, manipulation of the material world via physical force, and reorganizing their structural power, manipulation of the social world via rule and institutions, in order to create an asymmetric means to counter America's strength. So the second part of my paper looks at the hacker community, and I start off talking about some very basic things, such as how the internet was made public to China, in 1994, and how this led to the emergence of hacker individuals and then hacker groups such as the Red Hacker Alliance. I'll just let you read that part. Some two parts that I found really interesting in this section was basically just my discussion on how cyber nationalism is different from the nationalism, driving the government, of course. And just to clarify, cyber nationalism is non-government sponsored, and also it originates, from the China online sphere. So naturally, the culture surrounding this is very different, even though the government and the hacker community have a common understanding of the center of humiliation. Now, the other part that I thought was interesting was just the discussion of symbolic power and symbols. And let me just read something here. Such cyber attacks expressing nationalistic sentiments is essentially a conflict between symbols. The symbolic power in the protests comes in the form of attacking national government websites, representing Japanese customs and memorials that disagree with the memory of the Chinese population. Defacing government websites, which is essentially digitally programmed graffiti, is a way of revealing another perspective of memory and how history/stories and symbols should be remembered. So, in the third and final section of my paper, I'll look at the collaboration between the government and hacker community. Even though I conclude with a discussion of Charles Tilly and his remarks on coercion, capital, and commitment, I think the most interesting stuff was actually in the beginning of this section. And basically, I cite Scott Henderson and his article on The Dark Visitor, which is really cool because he actually has interviews with some representatives of some of the better well-known hacker groups such as China Eagle and the Red Hacker Alliance. So let me just read something here that I wrote in regards to this. Henderson elaborates that in Chinese society, independence from government direction and control does not connote the idea of separation from state. As the PRC government views its citizenry as an integral part of comprehensive national power and a vital component to national security, the PLA emphasizes the integration of military and civilian roles in their strategic doctrine of future wars. So I thought that was very interesting, just because what Henderson is trying to say is that the lens that the U.S. uses to interpret, to answer the question of whether there is collaboration, we are assuming a different cultural lens in how we understand the relationship between the government and the state. So that basically concludes my video conclusion. Have a look at my paper to better understand some of the points I made here just in brief. Thank you very much, and all the best to you. Bye-bye.